Welcome to 24 Caris, where we believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion requires a 24/7, 365-day commitment. I'm Kelly Johnson, the founder and CEO of Caris by KJE. Today we are super excited to launch a new series where we're going to be talking about employee resource groups. It's a hot topic. It's a continuous effort and focus within the DEI space. And I'm super excited to have a good friend join me to help bring to light some of the best practices, the pitfalls to avoid, and the benefits that can come from employee resource groups. So help me welcome Dameka Stringer to the show. Damika, welcome to the show. It's good to see you, girl.
It is good to see you, girl. Thank you for the introduction. I'm super stoked. And just thank you for the invitation. And can I also say this is my first podcast?
Yes.
So I'm really stoked about this.
I'm excited. Oh, I'm honored to be your first podcast experience.
I know.
It's going to be fun. I've been looking forward to this since we've been talking about it. And so let me brag on you just a little bit.
Goodness gracious.
Dameka Stringer hails from the south side of Chicago. I have to do that over. South side, right?
Look, we take that very seriously.
Yes.
So I guess sort of like the Texas culture with the Aggies and the Longhorns, but we won't digress.
We won't digress, but we gotta give the South Side its props, right? So, Dameka hails from Chicago and has been in. How long have you been in Texas now?
Oh, so I relocated back. So I have two stints. So I relocated back to Texas in around 2010.
Okay. Yeah. So you've been here for a minute now, and you'll love hearing from Dameka. She has so much experience in the corporate human resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Graduated from Depaul University, has a master's degree in IO psychology, and just a fantabulous, I'm going to make that up, but just a fabulous DEI partner, thought leader, change agent. Just really appreciate your leadership, Dameka, over the years, and thank you for the ability to walk alongside you along your journey.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm looking at you like, and it's always fascinating, of course, when conversations take place and introductions, take place, and when you hear people introducing you, you're thinking, is that me? Because you're so busy doing, you don't take the time to stop and reflect on what you're accomplishing. So thank you for that great introduction.
You're welcome. You deserve it, and you've earned it. And I think, that is what today is about. It's giving an opportunity to sort of pause and talk about some important topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So on 24 Caris, each month, we're highlighting just different aspects of culture transformation, how organizations can experience it through diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're going to focus on employee resource groups. That has been a big part of our partnership historically. So just in case people are not familiar with what is an employee resource group or ERG, why don't you kind of school us on that a little bit?
Yeah, so let's do some schooling. So employee resource groups, so of course stand for, you have the acronym ERG, so that stands for employee resource groups. In some cases, some companies call them business resource groups. And so I like to think of them as organically formed, sort of bottom up, really employee-led and employee-designed groups that are in direct alignment, if done right, are in direct alignment with the banks or any organizations. And I'm thinking about the bank because that was my former employer. Kudos to, I won't speak to the details, but kudos to my former employer, where I did some really great work with, I was blessed to do some really great work with Kelly as it pertains to standing up our first set of employee resource groups. So shout out to the bank and shout out to Kelly. So basically, they basically are employee-led organic organizations where employees are leading the effort to really stand side by side with the organization and be a strategic partner to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's why it's so important to have employee resource groups play a critical part in any organization's diversity and inclusion journey, because they have the pulse when it comes to what's happening on the ground. When we think about boots on the ground, when it comes to leadership, sometimes we're way up here, and it takes a lot to sort of capture what's happening down here.
Right.
So the employee resource groups, they're doing that. And if structured the right way, strategically, they're really helping to succinctly advance diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities for the organization. So I'll just basically say a special shout out to employee resource groups, one, because these folks have day jobs. Right. And so you're talking groups of people that are people leaders. You're talking about groups of people that are individual contributors, or like what I like to call individual leaders. And they have really big day jobs. And so they're marrying their day jobs with volunteerism, right? Because they volunteer to lead these efforts and help the organization move diversity, equity, and inclusion forward. So that's sort of like my spiel for what is an employee resource group. It's really your strategic partner. It's your employee voice that you're missing when they're not at the table.
I love everything you said, and in particular the fact that you highlighted, there should be a level of being organic with employee resource groups, but the structure is also extremely important. So there's this kind of finding that right balance between structure, being organic and natural, employee driven, but supported by the organization with the right resources, training, and of course a strategy, right? We need to help ERGs have a path forward and a kind of a North Star of where we're trying to go. You started to talk about it, but I would love to have you say a little bit more in terms of what have you seen as the benefits of ERGs to an organization? Because you didn't really give yourself a lot of credit, but you led the entire initiative to stand up 6 employee resource groups at one time, several years ago. And so I think we have to, you of all people, I'm like, we've got to get Damika on the show, because you started from the foundation, right? And you built. So talk a little bit about those benefits that you saw in the organization.
Yes. So the benefits are countless. And of course, before I jump into the benefits, I'll just say it took a village. So, and of course, Kelly was a part of that village. And, I had an amazing team. This was new to the organization, so I had this amazing team full of passion and just creative thinking when it came to standing up our employee resource groups. I also had tremendous support when it came to senior leadership, which is critical. And I think any diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner recognizes that it starts at the top. I don't care what initiative you're trying to pursue or accomplish in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, you have to have committed senior leadership. So it definitely took a village. But to your point, yes, in the role that I played, there was a lot of responsibility in my space to make it happen and pretty much make it happen pretty quick. So when it comes to some of the benefits of employee resource groups, like I mentioned to you, if you're trying to do some really trying to do some of the, so let me say it this way. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is very fulfilling work, but it can be very challenging, complex, and nuanced work. And so it definitely takes a village to do that work. And so, some of the benefits to that is, as we're saying we're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to breathe life into that. And it takes people to do that, right? It can't just be a core value. It can't just be something on the website or, in the handbook. And so the benefits they're countless. First and foremost, an employee resource group, or I'll say an employee resource group program, inherently is a leadership development program. Right? Because
say that again.
Hello. Because like I mentioned, you have a nice mix. I mean, you have people leaders and then you have individual contributors or / what I like to call individual leaders. So when you're talking about individual contributors, many times they haven't had exposure to what it's like to be a people leader from many angles. So when we talk about, performance management, coaching, guidance, they haven't really had a chance to lead in that way, to communicate a vision, to communicate goals of their employee resource groups and their priorities, and with that being said, to really motivate a following, because the employee resource groups have, of course, generally they have a team, right? It's just not one person running the employee resource group. That would be insane.
Right.
So they generally have a team, right? So it's like, this is like practice for direct reports. And then, of course, they have membership, which if you're a people leader, I would say that would be equivalent to the employee population that you're trying to, support and engage and so forth. So you're building future leaders. So when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity from a race and gender perspective, background perspective, that's a huge talent pipeline to tap, because they're getting practice, right? Not just in theory, not just watching, videos, not just going to training, on-demand education, which is great, the complete supporter of all of that, but they have a chance to apply it. And it's not always easy, to know how to, say, for example, from a performance management perspective, if I'm an individual contributor, I've never given feedback to my peers. So what does that look like? How can I make myself comfortable around this? Am I really supposed to possess certain competence or competencies when it comes to leading this employee resource group? So it's not just about the programming, and the education, but it's also about, you're now a leader.
Right.
So like all that stuff that, your manager sort of does, and, you see, the coaching and the guidance and direction and performance management, and that sort of is a part of your work. It's in a smaller bubble, right? To your point about the governance and the structure and the education and the training, so that they know how to do it and they're competent and competent. But that's a pretty hot leadership talent pool.
Yeah.
And then we talk about different employee resource groups and how diverse they are. We talk about how we want our communities to reflect, our organization to reflect the communities that we serve. That right there represents, meeting that goal. You're developing those diverse leaders intentionally. They're getting hands-on experience. They're strengthening their, competence, cultural intelligence, all of their muscles in that space, being inclusive leaders. So all those things that we want our people leaders to be, they're doing it. And sometimes they're doing it without even recognizing that they are doing it.
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, such a good point. I mean, you just dropped a lot of what we like to call golden nuggets.
Okay, I'll take it. I like gold. I like silver too, but I like gold too.
We like gold too. We're partial. 24 carats, 24 karat. We're partial to gold too. But Damika, thank you for sharing just sort of great foundational perspective on what are employee resource groups or ERGs or business resource groups. But I love that you highlighted just the value that employee resource groups can provide an organization from a leadership development pipeline building standpoint. We're going to continue this conversation because we're barely scratching the surface right now, but you have already provided just such great perspective. And I think kudos to you for truly recognizing the value of ERGs to an organization just in that one point alone, right? There's more, and I'm sure we'll talk about those in our next conversation, but just the level of understanding, the depth of understanding around pipeline building, succession plan building, leadership development. I think that you are one of the few DEI leaders and practitioners that I've worked with that truly embraces and understands the full breadth of the opportunity. And so I just have to give you your props there. But this has been a great conversation. We will continue it. So hang tight, Damika. We'll be coming back in just a moment. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to this episode of 24 Carats, where we believe that it takes a 24/7, 365-day commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion to truly transform the workplace. Thanks so much.